Hi, this is Trevor Conquergood. Welcome to this week's R&K Software Club's video for the week. And the topic for this week is going to be applique, and we'll talk about some of the various applique settings and specifically how we can do break apart on our appliques for even sort of extra control over the shapes. And so we'll go through everything starting from the beginning. I've just got this crown shape on my screen. I'm going to select it. And the applique tool is found down here on the bottom. And just like any of the tools on the toolbars, once you click on it, the software will assign those applique stitches. And so notice that now that I've stepped on that tool, that if I look in the sequence view and I look at the shape, it says that it's an applique shape. Now, if I select that applique shape, notice in my properties box, there's a tab for applique with all of the settings for applique, and there's a second tab called applique extra. And so we'll start by just quickly reviewing the different controls that you have over an applique. And of course, these are not going to be here if your shape is not an applique. In other words, if I click on the run stitch tool right now, it'll convert that crown into a regular run stitch, and therefore the properties box will have tabs that as they relate to run stitch. So when you click on applique, it gives you the applique properties, and it creates 3 color stops for the design. And you can see that first of all if I just click on our slow redraw. There's color number 1, it's blue, color number 2 is red, and then color number 3 is blue again. And when the machine stops like that, there's information. So if you look here in your sewing sequence, it says it's an applique shape, and if you click the plus beside it, it will show you those 3 colors, blue, and then a stop that says some information. Before proceeding, place the applique fabric over the placement line. If the fabric isn't pre-cut to size and is to be instead cut away after tacked down, make sure the fabric is at least a ½ inch larger on each side of the line. In other words, if you're doing a cut during sewing applique, after the first color is finished, you place your fabric over that line and make sure that it's at least ½ inch bigger. Then when it sews the second run stitch, you'll get instructions that will tell you before proceeding to cut the excess fabric around the outside. And if you're using a pre-cut applique, then this step could be kind of skipped, and you would just simply push start again to move on to color number 3, which is known as the cover stitch. And in this case, it's what you would call a satin stitch cover. Now, if I select that applique shape and look at the properties box, the first thing I can change is the type of cover, and the options are satin stitch, blanket edge, and motif. So a blanket edge is going to give it more of a handmade look. And for each one of these styles, there will be things that you can control. So for example, I can control the width of the applique and how close or how far apart they are. If I choose a motif, then I have any number of decorative patterns that I can choose from to be the border of your applique. And again, there's different controls that you can control, like the stitch length, the size, and you can even offset it from that sort of center border line. If we go back to the basic satin border, there's so the applique inset is the sort of setting right here that I wanted to talk about. So the idea here is when you're sewing over certain types of fabric, you might like to adjust that. So notice, I'll just click off, there's the blue run stitch right there. That's the exact shape of the applique. And the red run stitch is just to the inside. That's the tack down or the trim around line. And then your cover stitch is 50% to one side and 50% to the other. Well, if you're sewing on something thick like fleece, it may be hard to trim really close to this run stitch, and this satin cover may not fully cover over all of your fleece fabric. And so in that case, what you can do is select your shape and use the inset. So if you move this to, let's say, 30% instead of 50, it will push more of the stitching to the outside and have less to the inside. So 30 on the inside and 70 on the outside. And you could do the opposite, change it from 30 to 70, and that will push the border towards the inside. And so if you were sewing on something like organza and it was very delicate and you were worried that after you trimmed around the outside of it that it might start to come away on the inside, then you could offset it the other direction. And so this is the idea that these are for, fine-tuning your applique to suit the exact materials that you're using. Talking about material, you have the ability to display a fabric in here. There's just a small number that the software comes with, but you do have your ability to add your own fabrics to this fabric library. I'll just put some gold fabric in there, and so it doesn't change anything in the way the design sews out. It's just a display thing so that when you look at it on screen, you can see it displayed that way. If you want to control the colors of your design, select on the shape and scroll through your colors in your color bar. And so when you find a color that you want to assign, if you click on it, it gives you the option to assign it as color 1, color 2, or color 3. So color 3 being the satin cover, so I'll make that be gold. So this is the idea. Now, if you were pre-cutting your applique, so if you were going to make a template and have this applique fabric already cut to the shape of this crown, maybe you want to use a digital cutting machine, then in that case, after the first run stitch stitches out, you place your fabric down. If you're using Floriani Applique Wonder, you would stick it down, and then when you press start, the red run stitch would quickly capture around the outer edge of your sort of, fabric that you'd stuck down, and then you can finish it off with a cover stitch. Sometimes when I have a satin cover like this, we'll choose to have a underlay with that, and so if I select my shape, notice here that when you're using a satin finish, you have an extra option to include an underlay. So these are most of the settings, but we still have our Applique Extra settings, and in Applique Extra you can control the stitch length of the placement line, and if you need to, you can offset that placement line from the actual line that you drew. And for the tack down, you can choose between a run stitch, a double run, or a zigzag. And so for a trim and place applique like this, a double run might be a good option. It gives you a little bit stronger of a run stitch because it sews around it twice. That way when you trim with your scissors, it's just a little bit something more substantial to trim against, I guess. Alternatively, if you wanted to do a pre-cut applique, then that might be a time that you would select the Applique Extra tab and change your tack down to a zigzag. And so when I choose a zigzag, then after I do my first run stitch and you place your pre-cut fabric down, it will do a zigzag to tack it down instead of a single run stitch, kind of stepping inside and outside of the fabric, and then carrying on with the underlay and then the border. And so this is all of the different ways that you can, I guess, control the settings for your applique. Now, I wanted to show you guys about doing a partial applique. And so to do that, we're just going to create another shape. So maybe what I'll do is create some kind of an oval like this. And we'll also convert that oval to be an applique shape. Okay, so now we have two appliques. If you watch the design stitch out, it would have, so that although they're all yellow, there are all stops. And so maybe we want to select this and assign this to color 2 so it's more easy to follow. So you'll see it'll show color 1, and then color 2, and then it'll show the border of the sort of first applique, and then it'll do run stitch for the second applique, second run stitch for the second applique, and a border. So 2 complete appliques. But a lot of times when we're having more than one applique, we want to remove these stitches from the first applique that are underneath the second one. In fact, a lot of times we like to have the fabric trim to match, and that's when using remove overlaps can be really helpful. So if you select both of your applique shapes, and then you right-click over top, you'll find the option to remove overlaps. And when you choose remove overlaps, it does 2 things. So first of all, well, it put the fabric inside. Let's just take that second applique and turn off the fabrics just so that we can see through it. I want you to be able to see what's happened because now the crown has been trimmed to match the shape of the oval. And so if you watch the design stitch out this time, it's just the same as before. It does the run stitch for the crown, and then it does the tack down for the crown before doing the border for the crown. Only now the border for the crown is only sewing where the border for the oval will not, be overlapping it. So it's been removed in that area. And now it'll do the run stitch for the oval and the tack down for the oval, and then finish off with a satin border for that oval shape. And so that's called a partial applique, and that works really great when you have a simple situation kind of like this where it's just two applique shapes. If you get to having multiple applique shapes, then it becomes a little bit harder, and what you might need to do is what's called break apart your applique shape. And so just notice if I create some kind of a rectangle and select that and convert that into an applique, that it appears as one segment. It does have three parts to it, but it's all one piece. And so what I'm saying is there is the ability to right click and do break apart applique. And what that does is it takes your one shape and it turns it into three individual shapes. So now I end up with a single run stitch, another single run stitch, and a steel stitch. So the software broke it into three separate parts. And so in that way, if you want to fine tune your steel stitch, change the way it sews, use a different kind of stitch, you can. Or if you want to break this steel stitch apart. And so I want to point out to you one of the designs that's for, it's from our free monthly designs for November 2021. It's called the Happy Thanksgiving Applique Turkey. And for this design, when we created it, we chose to not use, so it actually has a blanket stitch edge around it. So here's where it got a little bit tricky, because when I created the applique for the turkey, I was concerned that if I did remove overlaps, that it wouldn't leave very much fabric for this background color. And my idea was to kind of actually have some overlap fabric, not necessarily overlap blanket stitches, but I wanted the first and second color to kind of have some margin. And so I drew the shapes myself, and I'll just show you, it's this color right here, the second applique for the blue. I'm just gonna hide the applique fabric for that so that you can see what I'm talking about. So notice the burgundy fabric and how it isn't trimmed to match, how I left it overlapping. And so the idea is here that I had, there's 4 layers of applique, and what I did was I drew them to have a certain amount of overlap. So if we took the next applique after that and we turned off its fabric as well, you'd see the same kind of idea that each layer of applique was kind of overlapped to be underneath the next one. And so I guess the reason I'm saying that is because I also wanted the design to have a partial cover stitch, even though I was using the blanket edges. So if you watch it stitch out, it does the first, here, let's get rid of all of the applique colors, because that'll make it a little bit easier to see, I think, because the applique fabrics kind of block seeing what's happening. So if I draw the stitches, it does the first color and stops, then the second color and stops. But when it does the third color, it does the blanket stitches, but only from one side to the other and not on the inside edge. So it moves on to the second applique piece, and I was able to achieve that effect of having that. So here's the thing. If I select that very first applique shape and just make a copy of it, I'll show you how I did that. So let's start out with the basic shape, and then if I just click on the artwork tool, it'll be like an eraser. We can start over with this one. And so what I did was I clicked on the applique tool, yes, but I chose not to sew the finish. See that? And so it just does the run stitch and the second run stitch for the placement line and the tack down line with no cover. Now I took my shape and I copied it. and I pasted it. So this way, it's sort of like I broke it apart. I got two shapes. They're both appliques, but for the second one, instead of having another applique, I clicked on the motif. So the reason I did this was I wanted to give a blanket stitch edge to it, and so I thought that I would find a blanket stitch, stitch in our motifs, and what I found was there actually isn't one. And I do want to say a little bit about this because I created my own, and I thought that I could show you guys how I was able to make a blanket stitch edge. Well, of course, it's much too big. Let's just reduce the size down so it looks normal. There. And so one more thing I want to say here is about the direction of the blanket stitch edges, because we do have times where people have got just even a basic applique shape like this, oval like this. And so you choose applique, and there are some times where people have requested to have the blanket stitch edges go the other direction. And so that is something that we'll look at for a future update to be able to, I guess, control the direction of those stitches, because right now they kind of by default fall to the inside. And so like I was showing you with my example here for this one here, I was going to break it apart and make a second copy and have that copy be a motif and then create the blanket edge myself. So it was very easy to create your own motifs. And if you've never done it, let me just quickly show you. And I'm sure we could do another video about just that and get a little more in depth with it. But the idea is, and maybe I'll just turn on a grid so I have something to follow and zoom in nice and close to it. Let's use a ruler and measure how big is my grid. And so it says that that is 0.08 of an inch. I'm going to do it in metric just so that I can understand the smaller numbers like this. So it's about a 2 millimeter grid. And usually I do blanket stitches around 3 millimeters, maybe 4. And so this is the idea. I'm going to use my manual tool and just draw the blanket stitch. So I'll start here. I'll go, let's say 3 millimeters. So 1.5 kind of grid marks. And then 3 millimeters. And then 3 millimeters down again. And that's, let's go right there. And that's it. 1, 2, 3 stitches, because if you repeat that forward, up, down, and then you repeat it again, forward, up, down, and again, forward, up, down, that would create the E-stitch or that blanket stitch. And so to create a motif, this is how you do it. You need to use stitch mode. So notice on the left-hand side, the tool that's 5 tools down. Turn on stitch mode and click and drag to select all of the stitches that you want to make into a motif. And now click on the Tools drop-down menu and choose the Motif Pattern Editor and choose to save this as a new motif. And so this kind of gives you an example of what it would look like as a motif fill. Click Save. It gives, you need to give it a number. I'll call this one 195. And click Save. And so now that that's been created, if we draw a line, and I just have to wait a little extra moment for it to be finished. So if you take a line, and it could be any line, just go ahead and draw some artwork, select your artwork, and click on your motif tool. Find your pattern selector, and I called it 195, and so there's number 195. Say OK, and there you have it. You've created your own motif pattern. And so if you need one that goes the other direction, then you basically flip this around and create it again. And so I've got in my collection now, I actually made 198 and 199 to be, blanket stitch edges that I could use to flip either direction. And so I guess I thought I would show you that. So the idea is with the turkey, I took that shape. Let's get rid of these extra pieces here now. I took that shape and I copied it and I pasted it. And so the first one was the applique, and I only used the color number 1 and the color number 2. And then I copied it for color number 3 and I made it a motif run, only I don't want the motif stitches to run on the inside I only want them to run around the outside, and I want them to go the other direction too. So what I'm actually going to do here is show you how to break this line into pieces so that I can get rid of the part that I don't want. And probably the easiest way to do that would be to click back on that gold, orange star that says artwork. Let's just make that shape artwork. And while we're at it, I'm going to hide the applique prior to it. So all we can see is that piece of artwork. And we'll just click on it to select it and go to the shape tool. And when you're in the shape tool mode, you can click on a point like that one and then right click, and one of the options is to split the line. Now, when I choose split line, you might not notice right away that it's done anything, but it has. Look, if I move this node, it broke them apart. They're split. And now all I need to do is come over to the other side, find this node right here, and right click, and say split line there. And now it actually breaks it into two fully separated pieces. And so you've got the outside one and the inside one. And so the inside one I didn't need, I just click delete, and it's the outside one that I click on the run stitch, the motifs run stitch, sorry. And then I chose, I think I made it 199 points to the in. Oh, and the size is wrong, so let's just resize that pattern. And that's the one that goes to the, so I was right, it is 198 that goes to the outside, and I don't know why I got the pattern size set so large, because 3 is plenty big enough for a blanket edge. And so anyway, you guys, the design is part of the November 2021 free monthly embroidery designs. It's a turkey, and it has 4 layers, and each one of the layers has a little bit of an overlap to the fabrics as I showed you, but the blanket edge is only around the outside, and it makes a real cute design. Anyway, I hope this was an interesting video and I didn't get too in-depth with you guys. Perhaps we'll make another one sometime soon with more information about how to create your own motifs. Until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.